we need to talk about the role that hunters and anglers have played in conservation. In really, we are the conservationists. Like birders, paddlers, hikers, they can call themselves what they want, and we definitely need them in our tent and our funding models to recognize that. But they're not conservationists in the sense of the North American model of conservation. How we brought species back from extirpation, how we managed habitats for these species holistically across the landscape. So hunters and anglers have been paying for that since the early 1900s. We were the ones who developed the Pittman-Robertson Act that created excise taxes on firearms to be put into habitat. So for people to say, well, how can you call conservation killing? They're really technically defining the word conserving. They're not looking at the word conservation and what the word conservation means.
This is the Aptitude Outdoors podcast, where we interview travelers, explorers, and outdoorsmen and women to bring you the best tips and stories from around the world. Nick, welcome to the podcast. Super excited to talk to you. You were recommended by someone that listens to the podcast, so I'm really excited. I believe his name's Patrick Hogan. I'm not sure if you are well aware, but I want to give him a shout before we get started. So Nick, you're a hunting dog guy. I hear you're into that. So how did you get into hunting with dogs? Because that's like in my opinion, that's like some expert level stuff right there in the hunting world.
Well, when you get into hunting with dogs, you quickly learn that it covers up your inadequacies as a shooter. So it gives you cover, and then you say, it's the dog's fault, No, most of my hunting growing up from an early age was white-tailed deer hunting with my dad and grandpa. I grew up in a family that, like most folks in northern lower Michigan, father, grandfather hunted. It was very ingrained in our culture. I had November 15th was our opener of white-tailed deer firearm season. We had that day off of school. So I grew up like that. I grew up trout fishing, bass fishing. We have excellent trout streams in northern lower peninsula. And then really kind of came into high school and started to be about the fast life and girls and sports and all the things that take you away from conservation, hunting and fishing and things you love. And did that until I got through college, went to college later on. And when I met my wife in my mid-20s, we kind of decided she had grown up with short hairs. And I knew I wanted to remain in the hunting conservation world, having been a bow hunter, having bow hunted hard during my college years. But I was kind of bored of chasing brown goats through the woods. So we decided to get a dog and then quickly rescued another bird dog before that. And now that's my life. I have 3 of them and I spend probably 60 plus days a year wing shooting. And then also, 10 to 20 hours a week on average training dogs. So it consumes my life.
That is a serious time commitment. I wish that I said I spent that much time, doing things in the outdoors every week. I try to, but so I'm down in Northwest Ohio. So if I were to get in my car right now and drive 20 minutes, I'd be in Michigan. Grew up in Southern Michigan. I grew up in, right outside of a little town called Ida, Michigan. It's like in the middle of nowhere, south of Monroe, Michigan. So, I grew up in the woods and I've always just been obsessed with the outdoors, but I kind of came from like more of a, like just living in the woods, like not hunting, but more so of like maybe fishing and hiking and backpacking and kind of stuff. So my current adult life, I'm just obsessed with hunting and fishing, and I spend every weekend in Michigan fishing, and you're also big into fly fishing. Not something, I have to limit myself. I have to be super careful because once I dive into a new segment of the outdoors, I just tend to go whole hog, and like it's cost me a lot of money. So fly fishing is, northern Michigan is like the place to be for fly fishing around here. That's where everyone I know goes. What's it like up there? Because people that aren't from the Midwest, I don't think really give the Michigan the credit it deserves. It's just an awesome place.
In my job, and we'll probably get into this, working for Michigan United Conservation Clubs and Michigan Outdoors, the editor of that magazine, specifically the latter, I get to talk with a lot of folks who work across the country, fly fishing and traveling. And the consensus is Michigan is a sleeper, and folks folks just don't they don't talk about it because they don't want to give it up, or, I'm unsure. But when you go out west, trying to fly fish is very technical on a lot of streams, and it's busy and people travel there. And it's not to say our northern Michigan streams aren't, touristy and can be busy, especially the Sable. It's one of the most famous rivers in the world, or in the United States. But it's just a little bit different. The fishing's different. The fish are different, and it's special. We have trout just as big as out west, maybe not the trout per mile. But, we have a special hatch here called the hex hatch that they don't get out west. And those are Michigan mayflies. Even if you're not a fly angler, you've probably seen these 1.5-inch long mayflies on businesses and at gas stations. And trout eat those in the dark for about 2 weeks at the end of June. And that's a chance for people to catch a 30-inch brown trout in Michigan on a fly. And that's hard to do with terminal tackle, let alone fly fishing gear. So it's special. We have a special fishery here in Michigan. And it's not just trout. You can go pursue bass and walleye and bluegill and, muskie on the fly. My friends and I always talk about, Michigan as a fishery state. We may not be the best in everything, although we have a damn good brown trout fishery. We have a real good Lake St. Clair bass and muskie fishery. But we have everything. Like, you can drive within an hour or two and be fishing warm water, cool water, and cold water species. It's real cool to have that. Many states, and in fact most, don't have any abilities like that.
Well, my favorite thing is, I spend a lot of time in Northwest Ohio, Eastern Ohio, Western Ohio, even like you get out into Indiana and stuff, and it all has the same vibe. But then there's even until you get like an hour, 2 hours north into Michigan, it all kind of feels the same. And then you just cross this border where it's just like, okay, now I'm in like real Michigan. Like, this is the Michigan that they talk about. And I absolutely love it. I love going up on the Manistee. I love going up into the Upper Peninsula. And it's like, I could spend the rest of my life exploring Michigan and probably still not find all of the awesome stuff that it has to offer. So what's some of your favorite, not specifically for anything like hunting or fishing in particular, I don't want to give away any secrets, but what are some of the spots where you're like, man, I love this part of Michigan the most?
Drummond Island has held a special place in my heart the last few years. And it's not because the grouse hunting is any good. In fact, it's tough and it's busy. And you got to take a ferry to get there, and there's logistics. But you can leave the mainland Upper Peninsula, which topographically, and just mineral makeup is different than the Lower Peninsula. But then Drummond Island is its whole other animal of rock, and they call it the Rock. So that's a really special place. I've been fortunate to be able to hunt ducks and grouse and woodcock on. I'm from the Traverse City area, so that will forever hold a special place in my heart, whether it's hunting, fly fishing. It's one of those spots where, again, I could be on the bay hunting long-tailed ducks, go inland and hunt wood ducks, go catch trout or bass, shoot deer, black bear. It's all there within a half hour. And probably my third is Saginaw Bay. I haven't got to spend a ton of time, and when I moved down to Lower Michigan, it's funny to hear you talk about, driving north and you hit this where you're like, oh, now I'm in real Michigan. I always refer to it as a line of water I would swim in and water I wouldn't swim in because of all the farm tillage. But I think, Saginaw Bay, when I moved down here, I really had to look for a spot where I could go find that wild and, those things that I was used to up north that maybe aren't as prevalent in southern Michigan. And Saginaw Bay was that for me. I had to travel east, but I could get into marshes that were wild, and I wasn't sure if a human had been there in 5 years because it's so big and expansive. So those are three really special places in my heart. And in Michigan, we're just so fortunate to have all of these different kind of places. You touched on it. You could spend a lifetime going around Michigan, not even hunting and fishing, just trying to recreate, and you wouldn't see it all.
Yeah, and it's so strange for me because I've somehow managed to make a lot of friends in Texas, And the way that people think about hunting and fishing in Texas seems to be so drastically different from the way people view hunting and fishing in Michigan, because they're almost like polar opposites. It's like a lot of public land up in Michigan, a lot of places where everybody can go hunt, and it's kind of like a free-for-all in a way, whereas down in Texas, it's a lot of private land and ranches, and there's not that much public land. So with maybe people who aren't familiar with like how it works up in Michigan, like what's hunting like to you in Michigan? I mean, you do a lot of bird hunting. So what does that look like for you? How do you plan a hunt? How do you find a place where you're like, this is where I'm going to pick to go? There's tons of places to go. So
yeah, at a very broad level, I'm sure there's some clearinghouse where you can find public lands in the U.S. And I would wager a guess east of the Mississippi, we're probably the biggest. We have like 4+ million acres of state-owned land. That doesn't count federal, which is like a majority of the Upper Peninsula. So we have a ton of public land. I live on a state game area, across the road from a state game area, so I can walk out the door, hunt rabbits. I have pheasants. I shoot ducks. In Michigan, we have kind of these interesting public lands where you have the feds who manage a little differently. They tend to be more mature forests. They're not as aggressive with cutting on 2 tracks, and that'll be intermixed. Like our Huron Manistee will be intermixed with state lands that have a more active forestry approach, a more active wildlife management approach. And then in southern Michigan, in those areas where you don't want to swim sometimes, we have state game areas, which were purchased using different dollars, kind of the same idea, but they're meant for hunting and fishing, and those are located kind of in proximities to population centers. So I couldn't imagine living in a state where I had to travel hours to get to public land. Like I just couldn't, in Michigan, you're never more than 6 miles or 6 minutes away from water or something like that. I mean, we do not know how unbelievably blessed we are in this state with public lands, wildlife, water, and oftentimes that provides a lot of challenges for our agency department working on that, because we're so big and we're so complex and diverse. But there's no place better to be in the Midwest, in my opinion.
Hey everybody, thanks for checking out this episode. If you feel like you're getting something out of it, go down in the link below and buy me a coffee. The Aptitude Outdoors podcast is fully self-funded by me. So if you're digging it, I'm just throwing out a tip jar, and I appreciate you listening. Let's dive right back into this episode. Yeah, and I just talked to the Lake Erie waterkeeper on the podcast not long ago, and it's just like one of the things we talked about is out west, they're constantly fighting about water. And here, like, we have so much water that we're kind of like spoiled. We don't actually know what to do with it all. So like the Great Lakes in and of themselves are an amazing asset. And it should be like a national treasure. It is a national treasure as far as anyone I know is concerned. So you do the writing with Michigan Outdoors Magazine. How did that come about? Because, outdoors writing is awesome. I love reading. I love finding magazines, books. I just got a stack of old vintage, like in fisherman books that someone got me for my birthday, because I'm just like, I love the old stuff, because the new stuff, it kind of loses the quirkiness of the old school methodologies and stuff. So as a writer, how'd you get involved with that? Because it's really important in the outdoors world, I think, the writing aspect.
You kind of touched on where we're at in an industry, and it's not just outdoor writing, it's journalism as a whole. We've moved to right now, quick top 10 thing type of ideas. One person is doing all the things. So they're taking photos, doing the copy editing, all that. Our newsrooms have shrunk. I was trained not that long ago. I'm not that old, and I only graduated 5-6 years ago, but in more of the classical form journalism. So long form, I started as a beat reporter covering public school system in Cadillac and the crime beat. And so I knew how to kind of build a rapport with folks. And I think that my writing tended to be a little bit more in depth. And I was in Cadillac, Michigan. It's an area that, there's hunting and fishing abound. So I was able to write at a level that I think people kind of really related with. And in that, I was fortunate to meet a gentleman named Bob Garner, who hosted Michigan Outdoors TV for many years. Bob Garner had his fingerprints on the bottle bill. That's why we have a 10-cent deposit on bottles here in Michigan, the trust fund. He was one of the legislative aides of Kammer when they did the Michigan Natural Resources Trust Fund. So he's in our Conservation Hall of Fame. He's a legend. And he's a dear friend of mine who read my writing, and, he was often the one to call me and knock me on the head if he's like, well, you didn't really say that accurately, or you could have done this better. But this position was coming open in 2017 as I was about to graduate college. I think I was 25 or so. And the stars kind of aligned that he set up a meeting with our then executive director, who was Dan Eichinger. Dan is now the DNR director, so it's kind of a small world. He set up that meeting. I met with Dan, and Dan hired me. And then shortly after, Dan went on to become the DNR director, and our deputy director, Amy Trotter, became our ED, and I've worked under her since. So I was hired as the editor of Michigan Outdoors magazine, which has been published since 1947. It's currently a 100-page quarterly. And then as our public information officer for Michigan United Conservation Clubs, and that has transitioned into a director of communications and marketing role. So kind of two hats I wear depending on what I'm doing and talking about, but it's all communications, all conservation all the time.
That's what we need more conservation. So how, I'm always continually on a toss up between is the modern age of the way things are doing, like what we're literally doing right now, podcasts, and everybody has a YouTube channel and this and that. Is it any better or worse than, maybe 40, 30, 20 years ago when people were reading books and watching like Bill Dance TV shows to get all their information or stuff like that? How do you feel about that? Because I find that a lot of the stuff that I am now getting into, like more detailed fishing techniques or more nuanced hunting and all this stuff, I feel like I just get sucked into a rabbit hole of like, what you really need is to buy more gear that's expensive, which happens to sponsor our show, versus like knowing your shit about animals, essentially, like habitat and stuff like that. So where do you kind of find yourself in that debate? Like, is it better to just kind of learn the old school techniques, or is the technology is super helpful, but is it like kind of hindering people in their advancement as hunting, fishing?
To preface this, I will say when although I shot my first grouse, or my last grouse probably before my adult life when I was 12, so I had grouse hunted a long time. I haven't grouse hunted but more than 5 years, so I am very new to the sport. Mm-hmm. When I write about grouse hunting, I don't write as an authoritative figure who has, 1 million birds under my belt. And I think that, back in 40 years ago, people like Bob Garner, people like, Morton F. on Michigan Orders, that's who we kind of trusted for our outdoors news and tips and how-tos. And with the digital world, everything has grown, and we're able to reach people like this, and there are lots of benefits like that of having a connected world, but we have to be mindful of who's telling us the story. And I think, that's on the end consumer and you to kind of look at who, especially if you're new coming into this world. And I think we probably should be more transparent with new people in this world of influencers and everything else, that even though someone's, telling you to buy a product, it may be because they're given that product, because they're paid to talk about that product. Something I learned early on in journalism was that if you're given a product for review, you state that very early on in the article, and that's transparent. Mm-hmm. I think it's something we're going to grapple with in our industry. I mean, folks want a source that they can trust for being new, for getting gear, and sometimes they can be just inundated with all the stuff when they Google these things. So, finding one or two sources you trust, or finding a mentor that can point you to a source or to a website or a podcast you trust, I think is a good first start. And then second, keep your ears open and don't be afraid to try new things. And I guess third, don't think you have to buy the most expensive things. When I jumped into duck hunting, a little segue, duck hunting is a very expensive sport when you start to talk about shotguns and decoys and boats and trucks to pull those boats. And, but I can walk out my door with my dog and a buddy and a half dozen old wood duck decoys and have as good as a time as I'm going to have motoring out 5 miles on Saginaw Bay, and that Saginaw Bay trip cost me $200 just to get out there and do it. Mm-hmm. So, you have to kind of realize what you're after in the hunting and fishing world. And I've made that arc. I started where I needed to shoot all the birds, every bird possible, and be with all the people doing that. And then I quickly learned that I would rather be with people who are enjoying the time of field. So it's what you want to look for in the industry. And you hit the nail on the head that there's a lot of influencers. There's a lot of noise out there, and you kind of have to sift through it and look for a source you trust.
Yeah, it's funny. I like talking. So my grandma has a cottage up on this lake, and it's like having a lake place in Michigan is just like a thing. Like a lot of people are like, you get to go to a lake house. I'm like, yeah, but everyone has a lake house. Like it's not like a lake house in like the Hamptons or something. It's like there's so many lakes. So, it's basically like a trailer park community up in Southeast Michigan or Southwest Michigan. And it's like, I love talking to the old guys because they see all like my like newfangled tackle and all this stuff. And they're like, dude, I've been using minnows for 40 years and they're still catching more fish than me. So it's like, that puts me into perspective real quick with the old guys. They're like, dude, you're just buying crap. So I really love that aspect of it. Like, do you ever get to hang around with the old guys and they think like everything you have is just like insane? Like, what do you need all this crap for?
I have fun with them because I actually hunt with quite a few old guys. And sometimes they're right, but sometimes they're also wrong. So like the Garmin Alpha, which is a GPS tracker for dogs, I mean, that's a game changer. We can now put a collar on our dogs and I can know exactly where it's at up to 9 miles away. These guys hunted without these things forever. And I had 5 of them, probably a handful of friends that were older and said, I'll never use that. And then as soon as they hunted with me once, they're like, oh, okay. And, so it's fun to convert them. But I absolutely agree that probably more times than not, we make things much more complicated than they need to be in the hunting and fishing world. I mean, think about the first time you caught a bluegill. You probably didn't do anything too crazy, we just waterfowl hunting, same way, like realistic paint schemes and flocking. And is the eye the right color? If that duck can see the eye of that decoy, it's close enough for you to be pulling the trigger. So we overthink it. And often it's our human inadequacies of shooting or, the other mistakes we make that really matter. And instead we place our focus on, it's that Rapala color or it's the wacky rig's not right. And it's whatever helps you sleep at night, I guess.
Yeah. I love that. That's a downfall of the outdoors is there's so many toys to play with that it's just like you can't walk into a bait shop and be like, I gotta try. I just gotta know if it works or not. But anyway, we'll switch gears here a little bit. MUCC, Michigan United Conservation Clubs. You guys, statewide organization, huge organization for hunters, fishermen, everybody. For people who don't know, what are you guys about? What does MUCC do, and what's like your mission and all of that stuff?
Yeah, so we were founded in 1937. Our mission is to unite citizens to conserve, protect, and enhance Michigan's natural resources and outdoor heritage. We operate in 4 main pillars. Those are policy, advocacy, education, communications, and habitat. And so through that, we're most known probably our policy advocacy. So I'm a registered lobbyist. Our executive director is a registered lobbyist. We actually have a policy assistant. We work on all sorts of legislative rulemaking, plans that the DNR will look at that take into consideration as they work through regulations. We got our start in the 30s when the governor wanted to take over power of appointing the director of the Department of Conservation at that time. We said, no, that should lie with the bipartisan body that sets our regulations, the Natural Resources Commission. And we've really maintained that political prowess ever since, that, we want to insulate our natural resources from politics. We're a nonpartisan 501c3. We do not endorse candidates. Conservation is camouflage. It's not red or blue. So that's kind of our big, policy bucket. We've worked on things most recently, you might know, as like the straight-walled cartridge, being able to use a straight-walled cartridge in southern Michigan. Prop 1 of 2020, we worked hard on being able to hunt, getting rid of the minimum hunting age. So a kid, that was an MUCC resolution. And the way this all works is our members, any individual member or club member, can submit a resolution to the body. It goes through the process. It gets debated at quarterly conservation policy meetings, and if passed, goes to our convention. And at our convention, it gets comments from the department, comments from staff, and then folks debate it. We have for and against mics. And if it is passed at our convention, it becomes staff's marching orders. So that's what the grassroots of all this means. It's not staff. It's not Amy, our ex-director, or me coming up with our priorities. They are truly dictated by staff. Our advocacy, or our education program, we've run Michigan Out of Doors Youth Camp since 1946. We've put almost 60,000 kids through that. 7 weeks each summer. We do 60 kids a week. We have hunting, fishing, trapping camps, water ecology, shelter building, all sorts of, these kids come down and they're outside for a week. There's no phones. We give them a clean shirt Friday when they go home, but it's really a great time. I've heard a little girl say that she saw her first star at our camp. She was from greater Detroit area, not allowed to be outside when the streetlights come on. So it's just unreal, just that we're able to have that impact on kids. And, now I've been able to meet a handful of former campers. So knowing that we're having that impact is really cool. The last two kind of program areas are Habitat, which is our on the ground program. Since that inception in 2013, we have completed over 4,000 acres of habitat improvement, something like 20,000 volunteer hours. Really what we're trying to do with this is bring folks out to public land near them, because it's close in Michigan, and get them hands-on engaged, planting trees, pulling invasives, putting up wood duck boxes, whatever we can do to better conservation in Michigan. And what's really neat about our on the ground program is it's not actually members usually who attend, although it's open to everyone. A lot of times this is the non-consumptive, the paddlers, the hikers, the birders that come to do these. So they're actually getting to see what hunters do and why we care, and all the things, we care about, and do the projects we're also doing. So it's a really neat way to bridge that gap between consumptive and non-consumptive. So we had policy, education, advocacy, and then communications, kind of my last bucket, and that's Michigan Out of Doors magazine. And then we also publish Tracks magazine, which is for 4th and 5th grade students. And that is a science-based reader that's used in classrooms throughout Michigan to help kind of inform lessons plans, anywhere from art, biology, anything like that. We use next generation science standards to write that. And then we also travel all over the state or at outdoor shows. So communications kind of throughout all of our program areas.
That's awesome. And, I think that's so important. A few things that you said are incredibly important. I mean, obviously, we start with lobbying. I mean, that's kind of a dirty word nowadays. The people, when they hear that word, they think negatively. But, I say this a lot, and, I'm not great at it myself, so I'm kind of, I guess, full of crap on my own side. But, getting involved with the governmental side of things is really the only way to change, because for everyone in the outdoors that is in love with public land, or whether you're a hiker or a backpacker, or you just like being outside, or whether you're a hunterman or hunter fisherman, whatever, hunterman, that's a weird word. There are people on the other side of things who don't want people to have that like the public land and stuff, take it away, take it so that they can use it for other things, business, oil drilling, whatever it is. It doesn't matter what it is. So like, I think people that are worried about that need to be involved in a club like this, because going through the processes, as much as nobody wants to deal with the government on any level at any point in time, because it's a huge pain in the butt, like it's really important to stay active if you see a problem, because there's going to be people who want that to go away. So there needs to be people like you and what you're doing at MUCC who are like, no, you can't just take it. So how do you say to people, get involved at a government level, like, but they don't want to? Like, how do you explain that, like, why you should join MUCC and be like, help us make sure that we can keep doing this and keep the outdoors free for everyone to use and utilize?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would first say, to quote our immediate past president, George Lindquist of MUCC, he was always really, really good at starting his testimony with saying the world is run by people who show up.
That's true.
So it's easy to yell and scream on Facebook, on podcasts, on things, but if you're not going to show up in front of those governmental bodies, or at least pay money into an organization, a person, a thing, or have some resources that are going to represent you there, that's on you. We can't, we're not able to make you be a conscious civil citizen if you don't want to have that. And that's just fine. A lot of people don't want to be engaged in those conversations, but don't be surprised or don't be mad when your voice isn't represented at those tables. So I would start with that. I would say that MUCC its value is that as a member, you're not going to be doing the legwork of figuring out who to reach out to and how to craft that message. And, your $35 is really you putting that trust in us to be that voice and to carry that message and to say, this is what Paul cares about. This is what whomever it might be cares about. And at the end of the day, we have many members who have their picture with the governor signing a bill, language they wrote in our resolution. That happens regularly. So how else are you going to pay $35, have some wonderful conservation idea that's going to change everything, get it passed, and then be there when the governor signs it or at the NRC when they pass it? I mean, that would be extremely tough for you to do on your own. And we just have those relationships. You said lobbying is a dirty word. It is, because it's often, connotated with tobacco and alcohol and extractive industries and kind of the dirty thing, not sexy things we want to talk about. But lobbying is extremely important in conservation. There are always, things pulling at public land, pulling at allowing more drilling, pulling at citing things on our public land, whether it be renewable energy, things like that. So not that all of that is bad on its face, but there's conversations that need to be had. And without MUCC being at those tables, there wouldn't be a conservation voice oftentimes. There wouldn't be I come from the classical journalism training where you were trained to be a watchdog of the government, of the bodies that dictate our lives. And MUCC has been that watchdog for the department forever. We have a wonderful relationship with them when needed, but we also sued them when they closed motorboating in Michigan a couple of years ago. So you gotta be fair and consistent in the conservation world. And, to people looking at how to join and why to join, where else are you going to get that value for $35? And you get a sweet magazine. So
yeah, sold. Life is hard, and we're out here doing larger-than-life things, whether it's pushing ourselves physically in the outdoors or mentally at work or in the podcast studio. Absolute Aid is here to help you focus, recover, and stay calm during your most intense moments. Absolute Aid, created by nature, made with science, for those who seek to do more. The other issue that I have a really hard time with, because like anyone who's like obsessed with the outdoors, you get really attached to what you like, and you have to remember sometimes that that's not what everyone likes. And with, I have all spectrum of different conservation groups, organizations here, and we're getting everyone on the same page is probably impossible, I would think, even though we're all generally in the same ballpark of things we want to conserve, whether it be like there's a debate whether like why would you want to hunt something if you're conserving it? You know what I mean? So there's like that whole debate, and like people who don't hunt or fish have a hard time understanding that. So I've always been trying to bridge that gap. Sounds like you're doing that well. It's just such a hard world because the thought processes are so different. Because like someone like you hunt fowl, you know, you hunted deer, you fish. You love those animals probably more than anyone or just as much as anyone, even if for someone who's a wildlife photographer, they love those animals too. It's just a different way of utilizing the same resource, and we all want to see that stuff hang around. What have you found that works to bridge that gap? Because when someone comments something like, why did you kill it? Like, you want to react and get upset, and it's like, this is a moment where I could possibly teach someone something. Maybe, I don't know. I have a hard time navigating that world.
So, you know, what we've learned, especially with the concept of R3, recruitment, retention, reactivation, is that it is extremely difficult to make a hunter. You know, Sean McKeon, a coworker, and I, he's our education director, we spent probably, 150 hours, dozen trips with a former policy assistant at MUCC, Ian. He was a vegetarian when he came to us, but he was certainly for hunting and for eating what he was going to harvest. But how much time do we put into that? And still to this day, I'm not sure Ian would go duck hunt by himself. Mm-hmm. So you see how much effort that takes to create a hunter. And where I'm trying to go with this is, rather than focusing effort and energy on that, we need to talk about the role that hunters and anglers have played in conservation. And really, we are the conservationists. Like birders, paddlers, hikers, they can call themselves what they want, and we definitely need them in our tent and our funding models to recognize that. But they're not conservationists in the sense of the North American model of conservation. How we brought species back from extirpation, how we managed habitats for these species holistically across the landscape. So hunters and anglers have been paying for that since the early 1900s. We were the ones who developed the Pittman-Robertson Act that created excise taxes on firearms to be put into habitat. So for people to say, well, you know, how can you call conservation killing? You know, they're really technically defining the word conserving. They're not looking at the word conservation and what the word conservation means. In moving forward, we just need to find the right way to bring these people along. We don't expect them to be hunters. We are always going to be in the minority, but we want them to be educated voters. We want them to say, I saw that duck hunter go out and put a wood duck box up. I saw them, go out and pull out some autumn olive that was taken over the field that I would like to walk my dog in. We need to keep telling those stories about the things we've always done, but be open about it. Don't say, this is ours and you don't get to be. No, be open about it and invite them in. And more often than not, they're going to go into a voting booth. And when we have another dove debacle or whatever it might be, they're going to vote with us. They're going to vote in the conservation corner. And I think that's important. We need to talk about funding. We need to talk about it not being taxes that predominantly fund habitat and wildlife management. And that conservationists care for the resource first and foremost. Oftentimes the voices and organizations you hear fighting the hardest against us are really just padding their bottom line with cute commercials. There isn't actually any substance when you go to public meetings and hear them speak.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. That's the thing too, is like, I've never tried to convert anyone to being a hunter, because if it's not for you, it's not for you. It's like, it is what it is. Just like some people could care less about badminton. Like some people are obsessed with badminton. Like, you're never going to convert me to be a badminton player. But like, if that's what you're into, I'm all for it, man. But like, when it comes to wildlife, and especially in the United States, we have this rare enigma of, conservation that, people all over the world are trying to replicate in various places all across the globe because it just is working here. And it's not to say that that's a perfect model, but it's saved tons of habitat and animals. And I think, like what you said, that is the main point we need to get across. Like, yes, some people do go out there and they just love to kill stuff. The majority of those people are not the people that I know. Like, that's the minority. The majority of people really do care and want to conserve. And I think that's the point. It's not a gore fest that people just go out there and love death. Like, that's never been anyone I've met who's been a hunter or fisherman. It's like the thrill of the sport, the thrill of the, being able to lose. You lose a lot when hunting. It's
more
not
times than not.
As they always say, it's called hunting, not killing. But a further point, that I think is the most important of all of everything we talked about is getting kids involved in the outdoors from a young age. It's getting harder, I feel like, as time goes on. And I'm not the guy that's like, blame the iPad, blame this. It's like, it is our responsibility as outdoorsmen and women to get these kids outside, because I know just as well as anyone, I have 5 nieces and nephews. They want to do is play video games. But when I put a fishing pole in their hand, there's like a 2-hour window where that's all they care about. And that, to me, that's one of the best things on earth. And teaching them, the biggest win I've had in a month is my nephew finally, I was like, here, hold the fish. No. And then one day he's like, let me hold it. And I was like, that's it, dude. My game, if I never did anything again in the outdoors, that's a win for me. So what you're doing with kids is awesome. What do you like to see with kids beside like the stories you've told about, getting these kids that come back and now you're seeing them as they're older, growing up, but like, what's the important thing that you would recommend to help get kids out the door, even at a base level, like just the simplest thing, not have to be hunters fishing, whatever.
Yeah, I think, that's the first part of it is you can't force them. I grew up in an area where it was oftentimes forced, and what it did was it created hunters until they were 18, and then people just never hunted once they were adults. You have to set realistic expectations. So even though your kid can shoot that 160-inch class buck in September, maybe have them shoot a doe first and then shoot that 160-inch class buck. Try to teach them a little bit about conservation. And even at a very broad scale, if it doesn't involve hunting or angling, just when you get them outside, don't tell them everything. Let them explore and show you what they're interested in. It might not be the deer poop you found. They might be interested in the poison ivy that has a neat, tip on its leaf. You have to be mobile and fluid and kind of know where they're going and encourage that, because that's eventually going to turn on, well, what is that critter and where does that critter live and what are the ecosystems that critter needs to survive. And you can build on all those little conversations. And just a simple walk in the woods can do that, as long as you let them kind of dictate where they want to go, how they want to go. I think as parents, I don't have children yet. My wife and I probably aren't too far away, but I think we have to take the phone out of their hand. I don't know other way to say it, and they may throw a fit, but whether it's an hour, a half hour, or 2 hours, just like you have a bedtime, just like, and I think a lot of parents are doing that, but you got to take the phone out of their hand. I'm not that old, but I grew up in a world where we didn't have smartphones until I was out of high school. So we didn't have, your phone was to call your mom to come pick you up for practice or whatever. It wasn't, we didn't do this. We didn't text. We didn't have any of that. So we were a lot more in the world, I feel like, then.
Yeah.
And we just need to get our kids back there, I think. And lastly, I would say, dads especially, take your girls out, please. Girls are better shooters. They're better anglers. They listen. They want to do these things. And it's not just, women are the fastest growing demographic, but gone are the days of people thinking they can't do things. Like my best friend, Abe, we'll shoot ducks and go home. His 70-year-old mom is cleaning them for us. Like she's cleaning the ducks and grouse. She's out there banding woodcock with us. So, throw out the stereotypes of what deer. You may still have your special good old boys deer camp, but, we're a diverse community of birders, hunters, hikers, shooters, trappers. We need to reflect that. And women are oftentimes that for some reason, the one shoved off to the side or saying, she can't come. And it's like, nah, man. I mean, my wife is a far better shot with a pistol than I am, and she casts a better fly than I do. So I don't want to take her because I don't want her to beat me, but I still do.
and it's so true. I mean, I had Renee Thornton from Women Hunt, the part of the Wild Sheep Foundation, on, and she was telling me as an adult she got into hunting and how it just absolutely changed her life. She's like working in like fast-paced business in Canada for most of her life, and now she runs a women's hunting organization. That's how much it meant to her. And I think if people, and this again, not converting people, I don't care what you do. If you like just hiking, that's fine. But I had a buddy, and I've told the story a million times on the podcast, I'll keep it short. Like, he liked shooting archery. We both got into archery at the same time. I didn't start hunting till I was like in my mid-20s. So I was just like all new to me. And he's like, I don't think I could shoot a deer. And I was like, well, just come sit with me. If you don't think it's for you, then don't. Well, I'm not going to force you to shoot a deer. So he took the hunter safety. He did it. And he took a shot on a deer 2 years ago, I think. Terrible shot. Missed completely, but he's hooked, man. That's all he talks about. He completely missed the deer. It was like watching him, but he's like, that was the most intense thing ever. I was like, that's what I was trying to tell you, man. But like, I think it's important. Once people try it, they're either going to love it or hate it, I think. And I've seen so many people my age starting to hunt. I mean, I'm 33 now, but when I started, I was maybe like 26. And there's a lot to learn. I don't have that lifetime of like my dad showing me and all these people, but that's my video game. That's my cell phone. That's my Facebook, is like digging in and learning. And it's so awesome. I think if people actually took the time to get into it and they took that time, like, I don't want to be on my phone. Like, I don't want anything to do with my phone when I'm outdoors. I want to be fishing and hunting. That's all I care about, And it's like, the whole weekend when I'm fishing, the phone I don't even know where it's at. I couldn't tell you where my phone was. And that's how it should be.
Something you said kind of jogged an opinion I have, and sometimes it's unpopular, but you and I'm probably different than you because I am different. I have that history and that tradition in my family, but you and our generation does it for a different reason, and the percent we are as a whole. You talked earlier about, sure, there's people that just want to go out and kill things. That has always been the case, but MUCC has always been where kind of the conservationists came to meet. So, a hunter isn't necessarily a conservationist, but a conservationist is usually a hunter or supports hunting or understands it. So, I think our generation, we are doing, as a percent, we're doing these things for different reasons than the generations before. And those mentalities that maybe sometimes didn't allow women, didn't allow people who looked different, that really was the good old boys way. Those are going to kind of, I think, go out the window with that generation, the baby boomer generation. And that is in no way a knock on that generation. They have done some of the greatest conservation victories in Michigan and across the United States. But they were just a huge percent of hunters. I mean, we had our peak. So when you have huge amounts of people, inevitably you're going to have bad apples. And I think that's kind of that mentality we can shift away from as the you and I's of the world start to be kind of the faces of hunting and fishing. And, we can be inclusive and, we just be representative of what we have in our world.
Yeah. And it's my personal reason for this is, and you could probably relate, like, we grew up in a world where we learned things about like food and the way things are grown and the way things are killed. And like, I'm like a mildly philosophical person, but I don't run my life like all I do is think about the ifs and the what, but like I went to school and we learned about how food was made. Like, so to me, I'm like, I have to eat, we all have to eat, but like, if I can get my own food, I think that's it's cooler. Like, to me, to get my own food that way, it's just a mindset of like, this is an accomplishment. It's not like I went to the store and bought this. And secondly, it's like kind of an attempt to remove myself a little bit from the system of like, mass produced food, which is impossible in this day and age unless you can dedicate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to hunting and fishing, which unfortunately most of us can't. And I've had people get mad at me on the internet for saying like, oh, you hunters are the same. You have this BS ethic where you think you're better than everyone. Cause you like, no, dude, I just want to do whatever I can to help with conservation. Like that's my bottom line. Like, I don't care what you do. And they always like, there's like people, especially I brought up farming on an episode. Dear Lord, don't even touch that. You're going to get crucified, which whatever, I don't care. But you know what I'm saying? So like, I get this. To me, it's more than just like, I love learning about what deer do and how they operate and, you know, how to hunt a deer in different ways and bow hunt in close range. Like, yes, that's a huge draw for me because it's challenging, but I also love the aspect of like, that's food for 6 months for me and my wife. You know, that's like, I don't have to spend $500 on beef. You know, I can spend $200 on a deer, you know? So I don't know. I kind of went down a rabbit hole there, but
no, I mean, when we look at data about why people hunt, the connection to food has increased, you know, the last 10, 15 years. That's becoming a more important reason, if not one of the most important reasons for our generation, especially. It's knowing where your food comes from and then being connected to it. So that's something we care about. You know, our generation has just shown that. And we've learned at MUCC, we had a program called Gourmet Gone Wild. And what it was took young professionals in the Lansing area. So think suit and tie going to work. And it would first feed them wild game paired with a good, you know, whether it was a liquor or a wine, and maybe do that once or twice before maybe archery and a trap demonstration and then taking them hunting. And, you know, we didn't create a ton of hunters, but when you tap into that demographic of people, you're kind of creating the right hunters that can have a ripple effect. Those are the people who, you know, are marketing professionals and they go and talk about voting things. And, you know, so you just, you have to remember that every time we're talking about hunting and fishing and whoever we're talking to, let's just be open, transparent about it. Remember that we have a big tent we need to get people under. In solving the funding issue is going to be probably the biggest thing you and I will face generationally.
And speaking of issues, it's important to talk about. It's not my favorite thing to talk about because there's lots of issues in the conservation world all of the time. It's like, it's hard to think about sometimes. But what's some of the bigger issues that you're facing specifically in Michigan right now on the conservation front? I mean, whether it's habitat loss, whether it's governmental, you know, bans on things. What's some of the stuff that you guys are working hardest on currently?
Yeah, I mean, some of the big threats to Michigan natural resources, chronic wasting disease is a huge one. You know, once that enters a deer, it's always fatal. It could drastically change how we deer hunt in Michigan, and really kind of just what it will likely do is push people from wanting to hunt when even if you know, no one's going to say you shouldn't eat that. Folks just don't want to hunt diseased deer and eat them. So chronic wasting disease is a big one. As much as it often sucks the air out of rooms, in certain circles, climate change is huge. You know, I'm a trout angler. I'm a duck hunter. I'm a grouse hunter. I don't need to talk and debate with you the merits of climate change. I see it every day. Our trout streams are 2-3 degrees warmer than they were 10 years ago when I started fly fishing. We are not fly fishing certain days because the water's too warm to catch and release fish and we'll kill them. That never happened 10 years ago. That, you know, 20, 30 years ago, you told someone that, they'd be like, no, that's not, you know, our waters aren't going to increase like that. Our mallard migration, we can look at when the peak harvest of mallards are. And obviously they are affected by photoperiod, but more importantly, weather. And that's like 2 weeks later in the last 40 years. Like the date we've harvested the most mallards is now 2 weeks later than it was. Our aspen is moving northward, and that's a climate change issue. So, you know, I know it's a loaded topic, and I don't even try to use it very often. It's just there are a lot of things tied to it. We have volatile weather events. We're getting I got like a inch and a half of rain last night in 2 hours. I mean, unreal amount of rain like this. We're just having these things are changing, and it's affecting our landscape and our wildlife. So climate change would be another big one. And then lastly, misinformation from the anti-hunting crowd, I think it's huge in other states. In Michigan, we are fortunate that we have MUCC. We have a director, a commission who are conservation minded, even though they're gubernatorial appointments. We just have a very good conservation ethic here in Michigan that's ingrained in people. That doesn't mean it can't change, but HSUS and the anti-hunting lobby, they're also lobbyists. So they're doing the same things we are. They're just fighting against us. And I think that, they're using the term trophy hunting to apply to, you and I going out to shoot a deer, you and I going out to duck hunt. That's trophy hunting to them. They may not say it, but the next sentence, they'll spin it in a way that's the context. So we just need to be mindful about that and remind people, especially those not among our ranks, that when they see those cute, cuddly commercials or hear those pitches that we want to shoot everything and kill everything, that not one animal has been extirpated under the North American model of conservation. In fact, we brought many back from the brink of extinction. And hunters and anglers pay for conservation. We are the conservationists. They're just trying to pad a bottom line.
Yeah, and the fact that, to me, the word climate change has been so bastardized, and just the fact that we're arguing about this at any level is ridiculous to me. And I'm on my own. I operate in my own space, so I could say whatever I want. Fortunately, it's not always the case for a lot of people, but it's absolute insanity to me when I think people will get mad at this episode because I'm saying this, and it's just what planet do you live on? What universe do you operate in? But anyway.
How this all started was we were approached by a National Wildlife Federation, who is a huge national organization that works on wildlife, environmental conservation issues. And they said, we're trying to do some groundwork for species in Michigan that are facing some climate change issues, but we're having trouble with the R's. We're not getting them on board. And what we did was, how can we talk to these people? They like to hunt and fish, a lot of them. So how can we talk to them? And we just started, like I just went through, we started to look at the things we like to do, and we realized it's not hard to tell this story. We're the ones seeing this on the ground change. And once we started kind of talking about it in that way to Republicans especially, they started to say, you're right. Our storms are more volatile. Our trout streams are warmer. There's a million different examples that you can see in nature, and you just have to start pointing them out and saying, these don't happen without a very quick change in our environment. And so that was kind of eye-opening for us. And we've made some really good inroads in the legislature with, Republicans especially, caring about fish and wildlife in that context. So it's been very good to see enlightening.
Well, kudos on that. That is a huge win, because that's one of the hardest conversations I have often. It just hurts my brain, I'm surprised. That
issue is one. Wolves are one where all the Democrats are on the other side. This is where MUCC is valuable. We look at things through science-based approaches and nonpartisan approaches. And you can't tell me that climate change, it's something that every Republican disagrees with and every Democrat agrees with, and then wolves, every Democrat disagrees with. That's so political. It's bullshit. Conservation can't be hijacked like that. And it's just the polarized world we live in, that most of the time conservation can be that knot that binds between the two parties. And in Michigan, especially, we can kind of bring folks together. But climate change and wolves are two of those issues that it's been tough. It's
funny you bring that up, because that was literally my last and next question was, Michigan is not something that I think the average person would equate with wolves. And I know there are wolves in Michigan. So what's the battleground with wolves? Because my personal opinion, which everyone will hate is that you should let the wolves go wherever the hell they want. They were everywhere. They were all over the United States. They were here in freaking Ohio. We had black bears. We had all this stuff. We had rattlesnakes, and then we wiped them all. They're like, no coming back. I was like, bring them back. Bring them all back here. We won't have to have any more, what are they, like deer culling programs. Bring all the wolves back. Bring all the bears back. Let's go. So that's my opinion, firstly and foremost.
I think that, in Michigan, our wolves are in our Upper Peninsula. So the current wolves we had migrated from Minnesota, Wisconsin. Like you said, wolves were across the whole landscape of Michigan prior to being extirpated. All of our Yoopers, especially in the 90s when wolves were really starting to be kind of recovered, they loved it. They wanted wolves on the landscape. They knew wolves were an important species to be living with. They're important for ecosystems. They're an apex predator, so they really help keep it in check. And that was all fine and dandy until the politics got into it and they were listed as endangered. So when you list a species as endangered, it is extremely difficult to get that species off of the endangered species list. So the Endangered Species Act did what it should have done for our Great Lakes region of wolves, in that it started to bolster populations when we protected them and they started to migrate and grow. But once they kind of blew the recovery goals by 3, 4, 5-fold, there's no trigger to take them off that list. So as you can imagine, that's where Yoopers, that was the point at which they said, we need to manage these because we're having more depredation. We're having human wolf conflicts. We're having dog wolf conflicts. Anytime you have a human wolf conflict, that wolves are becoming more desensitized to humans. They don't want to be around humans. So I think I agree with you in that they should be all over. And I think a lot of our native species should, if we had state management of them. In our current, if the scenario you're speaking of were to happen, I can tell you that wolves would be delisted like that. If wolves started to show up in Detroit and eat dogs and, if wolves were in the cities, this wouldn't be a UP problem, and I think that's something that's really hard for Upper Peninsula folks to grasp is why do Southern Michigan people get to vote on things like wolves? And I understand that in one hand, but at the other, the other side of it is this is a public trust. We're all a team. We're all in this together. These are our wolves, even though we're in the Lower Peninsula. I just wish that folks in the Lower Peninsula would be a little more educated. We had a woman in a testimony in a committee hearing in front of the legislature. She's from Lansing, and she said that she would be lucky if she had a pack of wolves on her 100-acre property in Lansing. And that's just literally a slap in the face to the sheep farmer who got his sheep killed and the guy whose beagle got killed. And, so that's, MUCC has supported wildlife management of wolves for decades, and we will continue to do so. Our executive director sat on the Management Advisory Council. Unfortunately, it's a politically loaded topic that until we have wolves in the Lower Peninsula, I'm not sure we'll be able to hunt them.
Well, yeah, that's a fair enough argument. I always just from my stupid opinion on everything, which is most things, I just say whatever. I always say people nowadays, especially where I'm at in Northwest Ohio, we need a little more danger in our lives. We got no dangerous species down here. It takes the thrill. When you go on a hike, there's nothing to worry about. If you unless there's some bears and wolves and stuff, it's the edge is gone. And we need to get a little more of that edge back, to get back to how it used to be, a little fear in your life, Not that we don't have enough fear from other things, but enough. I'll go down that rabbit hole all day. Before we wrap up, why don't you let people know where they can learn more about MUCC, how they can get the magazine, how they can become members, and, anything that you would like to kind of leave as a closing statement for people, maybe that you think they might not know about conservation or something you're really proud of in your career so far. Yeah,
so, the best way would be to go to mucc.org and then click join. You can join as an individual member. That gets you, it's $35 a year, and you get the magazine and then access to our policy process. And all of that information is on our website. If you have any trouble trying to navigate that, please send myself an email, ngreen@mucc.org, and I will happily walk you through that. The other website is michiganoutofdoors.com. That's michiganoutofdoors.com, no hyphens. That is our publication. That has a lot of our digital archive of magazines. It has lots of articles that aren't in the magazine. So we're trying to build that out and continually work on that site. Those are probably the two main ways to engage with us. And lastly, I would just say, whether it's MUCC, whether it's Pheasants Forever, whether it's Rough Grouse Society or Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, the world is run by those who show up. So it's hard to listen to people bitch if they don't want to show up and try to change the things they're bitching about. So I would say get involved, whether it's us, whether it's someone else. $35, a lot of folks spend that on things that are much less important than conservation and our heritage. So give it a try for a year, join an organization, get involved. That's why you're giving them your money, so they can be your voice. And that's really invaluable, and it's going to continue to be invaluable as we look at 21st century conservation.
Well, thank you, Nick, so much for coming on the podcast, man. I learned a lot. I hope my listeners learned a lot, and I appreciate your time, man.
Thanks, Paul. I had an awesome time, man.